The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The game solely responsible for getting me hooked on the Zelda series all the way back in the good old 90s. It's one of those landmark games whose impact on the industry can still be felt today, paving the way for the future of the action-adventure genre. Of course, the game has since been surpassed.
Hey everyone, Bandit here. Sorry for the intrusion, but are we talking about my favorite and objectively the best Zelda game ever made, Ocarina of Time?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally I prefer Majora's Mask, but, you know, to each their...
I'm gonna pretend like I didn't hear that. Anyway, as Maze Man here stated correctly, Ocarina of Time was a milestone. Not just for the future of the Zelda series itself, but the video game industry as a whole. Most will point to gameplay aspects of it, you know, Z-targeting, auto-jumping, context-sensitive controls, yada yada, but Ocarina of Time did so much more for the series than just game design. It also gave the world of Hyrule a much deeper story. And we're not just talking about dialogue and cutscenes, but rather storytelling purely through the environment. Of course, many Zelda games have since followed suit, and Breath of the Wild took the aspect of environmental storytelling to the extreme, but in large part, Ocarina of Time is the one that started it. In particular, when it came to dungeons. Sure, the older games had plenty of dungeons too, but they were just kind of there, just as a challenge for the player to overcome, and in most cases, it's never really explained why these structures exist or what their purpose was. In Ocarina of Time, however, dungeons finally became something more than that. Here, there was a story hidden behind the architecture ready to be discovered and theorized about. It doesn't beat you over the head with it, and they can still be enjoyed as just a challenge and nothing more, but those who enjoy going down the rabbit holes may find subtle clues as to what these places are or used to be.
Interesting stuff for sure, but what does it have to do with me?
Well, my friend, as you may have heard, I recently kicked off a new series of videos where I cover the lore behind every dungeon from various Zelda titles. So how's about you and I go on a little dungeon expedition together and you can help split the effort, 50-50?
Sure, I guess.
Magnificent.
Oh, can I have the Shadow Temple?
Yes, you can have the Shadow Temple.
Nice. Alright then, let's get started.
Ah yes, the Deku Tree. A true Zelda classic if there ever was one. Of course, in terms of gameplay, it's nothing to really write home about. I mean, it features some of the most basic puzzles in the series, and you can easily breeze through it in under 20 minutes or so, even on a first playthrough. But keep in mind that this was the first 3D Zelda dungeon ever conceived, and navigating a space in 3 dimensions was still a bit of a novel concept at the time. Yes, even something as simple as opening doors. Back in the old days, you just walked into a door and bada bing, bada boom, you're in another room, but now you have to press a button.
I don't know what to do.
But what about the lore behind this place? Well, I mean, it's inside of the Deku Tree. No mystery there, but there's definitely some ambiguity in history here. The origin of the Deku Tree is in large part left up to the imagination of the player. We know he's a guardian spirit, one of many seen across the series, and that he's been around for a very long time, popping up in various places across Zelda chronology all the way up to Breath of the Wild, which, as many of you know, takes place somewhere at the end of the timeline.
That said, Ocarina of Time is his first appearance, both in real life as well as in-universe, as no game taking place before Ocarina features the Deku Tree as we know it. There is, however, a potentially distant relative to be found in Skyward Sword, the very first adventure in the chronology. In the Faron Woods area, there's a gigantic tree towering over the entire forest, aptly named the Great Tree. Unsurprisingly, many suspect that this is the Great Deku Tree in its primordial form, so to speak, before he became a sentient being who watches over the forest and its inhabitants. Its size and location roughly match that of the Great Deku Tree, and just like the Forest Guardian from Ocarina of Time, the Great Tree is hollow on the inside. There's a central chamber with a similar looking pattern that spirals upwards, as well as a tunnel leading to a basement-like space below the root system of the Great Tree. It's kinda crazy to think that this could very well be the same place the hero of time would be put to the test many ages later. So what about the dungeon part of him? I mean, it's made obvious that the Deku Tree has always been hollow on the inside, but what's up with all the architecture? You know, the doors, ladders, torches, and all these other contraptions. Not to mention the monster infestation. It's explained that right before the start of Link's adventure, Ganondorf himself actually paid a visit to the Deku Tree in person. His goal was to press the Guardian of the Forest into giving him the Kokiri Emerald, one of 3 spiritual stones needed to open the door to the Sacred Realm and claim the Triforce. When the Deku Tree refused, Ganondorf placed a curse on him out of spite. Not cool, Ganondorf. Not cool at all.
Agreed, poor Deku Tree. By the time Link is summoned to meet the Forest Guardian, the curse has allegedly been festering inside him for quite some time. Link is then tasked with breaking the curse by venturing inside as a way to test his wisdom and courage, to see if he is ready to face the dangers ahead and ultimately save Hyrule. Now, you would think that this explains the various monsters roaming around the tree's innards, but actually it doesn't. Well, not entirely anyway. While there are some monsters who could be considered responsible for the slow decline of the Deku Tree's health, like the Goma, who are described as parasitic, there are various creatures here who don't seem to have anything to do with the curse. Most notably, the Deku Scrubs. One strange detail is that for some reason, the Scrubs refer to Goma as their queen, which is kind of odd when you think about it, since they're not even remotely the same species. We do find creatures who are of the same species and even share the same name, a larval state version of Goma who would no doubt grow to the same size if given enough time. It makes you wonder whether or not the Goma appeared after the curse was casted, or if they've always lived here undisturbed and that Ganondorf's curse either made them more parasitic and destructive to their environment, or may even share no connection to the curse at all. The Deku Tree doesn't exactly do a good job at explaining why he's dying. All he says is that the curse is sapping his power. But anyway, after beating the dungeon, it's also revealed that while Link's efforts to break the curse were valiant, the fate of the great Deku Tree was already sealed, and he knew this. So as stated before, it really was all just a test for the hero to prove himself as opposed to an attempt to save the giant guardian's life. As for the interior design of the tree itself, there are a few different options as to why it looks the way it does.
Because it's a video game level made for humans by humans for the sole purpose of entertainment?
No. Well, okay, yeah, but come on, man, this is a Zelda theory. Let's ignore the cold-hearted reality for a moment here. Anyway, the most obvious answer would be that since it was a test for the hero, it is just that. A trial conceived by the Forest Guardian, perhaps built by the Deku Scrubs or the Kokiri, so that one day, the chosen hero would be able to enter and prove his worthiness. A solid enough explanation, though that is some impressive bit of foresight on the side of the Deku Tree. But whatever, I mean, he is an ancient spirit guardian, I guess. Another option as to why the Deku Tree's insides have man-made features to them is that it served as a kind of shelter, a place for the beings of the forest to retreat to in case the forest would ever come under siege. Even for Deku Scrubs apparently, so clearly Tree Man over here doesn't discriminate. In Breath of the Wild, we can see a similar occurrence, where some of the forest spirits have made a home inside the Deku Tree, setting up shops and living spaces, and it makes sense. The Deku Tree is a being who provides safety and comfort. He's a guardian who protects the forest and its children from the dangers lurking outside.
Jabu's Belly, perhaps better known as the grossest dungeon in Zelda history. Again, no mystery in regards to what this place is. It's the insides of Lord Jabu, the only fish in history to receive lordship as far as I'm aware, and one with some major digestive problems. Like I said, grossest Zelda dungeon ever. The situation surrounding Jabu is actually quite similar to that of the Deku Tree. He's a guardian, in this case, of the Zora, who got cursed by Ganondorf after the Zora King refused to hand over their spiritual stone, the Zora Sapphire. Here too, the curse takes on the form of a kind of illness, something which is slowly festering and corrupting the creature from the inside. If you pay close attention, you can even hear that Jabu's heartbeat is integrated into the music track and purposely sounds irregular and offbeat. The Zora princess, Ruto, explains that she tends to Jabu on a regular basis, and as such, the guardian and her share a close bond. But that one day, presumably after he was cursed, Jabu swallowed the princess whole, along with her most treasured belonging, the Zora Sapphire, the same one Ganondorf was trying to obtain from the Zora King. Now, it may seem that Ruto getting munched up by her own fish god was a one-time anomaly caused by the sickness it suffers from, but Ruto mentions that she's actually been venturing inside Jabu's big old belly ever since she was little. For what reason, we don't know, and is perhaps best left unexplained. The only difference is that this time the inside of Jabu has become a lot more hazardous. Ruto mentions the sudden appearance of electric jellyfish, as well as strange holes, which allegedly weren't there before. A clear indication that Ganondorf's death curse is slowly eating away at the Zora Guardian from within.
Which, can I just say, is one of the most disturbing fates I could possibly imagine.
Yeah man, Ganondorf doesn't mess around.
So after traversing the dungeon's depths, Link is similarly faced with a giant parasitic creature and the alleged source behind Jabu's suffering, the bioelectric anemone Baronade, no doubt named after the real-life sea anemone, some of which are parasitic to other marine life. However, just like the Great Deku Tree, Jabu's death may have been imminent as well, despite Link's best efforts. The reason being is that when Link travels 7 years into the future, the Zora Guardian is nowhere to be found. It's actually one of the more famous mysteries in Ocarina of Time, and one which lot of people have speculated about over the years. Some think he may have survived and was relocated somewhere else, others say he probably died, either from the curse or the rapid changing climate in and around Zora's domain. Unfortunately, no Zora ever explains his absence or when and why he disappeared. It is true that a creature similar to Jabu named Jaboon makes an appearance in The Wind Waker, which takes place in the same timeline, but aside from the similar name, it's hard to say if they are actually related by blood in any way. If they are, there is a chance that Jabu did survive the curse and the freezing of the domain. But if they are not related, then perhaps Jaboon was already born before the curse was placed on Jabu. I'd say that he most likely died while Link was in purgatory for 7 years. The fact that the Deku Tree still wasn't able to survive the curse despite the eradication of Goma doesn't bode well for Jabu. I mean, after all, they are similar in stature, that is to say, guardian spirits. It's also worth mentioning that even after destroying Baronade, the inside of Jabu doesn't change or heal. The strange holes and electric jellyfish are still everywhere. Whatever happened to Jabu during and after the events of Ocarina of Time, others like him have picked up the torch in the future. However, his disappearance from the adult timeline will likely remain one of Ocarina of Time's many inexplicable mysteries.
The Fire Temple. Everyone's not favorite, but also not least favorite Zelda dungeon. Generally speaking, of course. It's one of those dungeons that isn't really talked about all that much compared to some of the others, and I can see why. It doesn't have the memorable atmosphere or sense of mystery as, say, the Forest or Shadow Temple. It doesn't have the killer soundtrack of the Spirit Temple, nor does it have the infamous reputation of the Water Temple. As Gen Z would say, it's kinda mid. The only things that really stand out about the Fire Temple are the iconic final boss, because, who doesn't enjoy fighting a giant dragon? And of course, the famous controversy surrounding the temple's original music track, which includes recordings of actual, translatable Islamic chants, which Nintendo was unaware of at the time. As such, the music was preemptively changed and the original score now exists only in the 1.0 and 1.1 builds of the game. Although the change is perfectly understandable, the inclusion of chanting was actually quite fitting. Similar to the Water and Spirit Temple, the Fire Temple is considered to have been a place of worship for the Gorons before it was corrupted by Ganondorf, as evident from the many altars and statues present here. There's also a few hints and remnants of that of a prison, like the holding cells that house some of the captured Gorons, but it's unclear if these were always here or if they were constructed after the temple was already corrupted. We don't know much about the Fire Temple's construction, but it possibly had something to do with the famous Goron legend Darunia's son speaks of. The story of an unnamed Goron hero who single-handedly defeated an ancient fire dragon using a giant hammer, a battle that saved the Goron race from extinction. The current-day leader of the Gorons, Darunia, is even said to be a descendant of said hero. Needless to say, this was a major historical event in Goron culture, and could have been the catalyst for the construction of the Fire Temple in the distant past, both as a way to commemorate the Goron hero of old, as well as to enshrine the final resting place of their deceased adversary, Volvagia. Even the legendary hammer used to defeat the dragon is still kept on an altar deep inside the temple.
After Ganondorf's rise to power in Hyrule, he not only corrupted the Fire Temple, but the self-proclaimed King of Evil resurrected the ancient dragon to punish and eradicate the Gorons for defying him. The sad part about the story is that when Link arrives at the Fire Temple, Darunia himself decides to face Volvagia alone in order to buy Link some time to free his imprisoned people. However, as he himself states, he does not possess the legendary hammer, yet still decides to go in despite the odds. I'm sure you can tell where we're going with this, but there's long since been a debate on whether or not the sages are actually dead or not, and Darunia's heroic sacrifice is often used as evidence that they very well could be, as opposed to the other sages whose fate is kept a bit more ambiguous. In the case of Darunia, it's pretty evident as to what happened to him. I mean, we see him entering Volvagia's lair all by himself, yet we never see him come out alive. And by the time Link follows suit, Volvagia is still there, ready to rock and roll. Meanwhile, Darunia is nowhere to be found. The Fire Temple may not be the most popular or most memorable dungeon in Ocarina of Time, but it definitely features an engaging story. A story of sacrifice, of bravery, and an ancient evil brought back from the afterlife as one of the more iconic final bosses in the series.
Oh boy, here we go. The Shadow Temple. Or as I like to call it, the E for Everyone dungeon. Yeah, Nintendo definitely wasn't holding back with this one. Now, it's not necessarily the most popular dungeon when it comes to gameplay, in part due to its extreme linearity, but it is one of the most talked about locations when it comes to lore. It fully embraces the darker and more mature side of the series, but does so in a way that most of it is left up to the imagination of the player. We learned that prior to the events of Ocarina of Time, Hyrule was embroiled in a fierce and gruesome civil war. The same war that made Link an orphan, killing his father and forcing his mortally wounded mother to leave the boy in the care of the Great Deku Tree before she herself passed away as well. The Hyrulean Civil War, as it's called, would ultimately decide which of the four prominent races would gain control over the land of Hyrule, which after an era of bloodshed, the Hylians ended up winning, with the remaining factions swearing loyalty to the Hylian royal family. When Link's adventure starts, the war has only been resolved for a few years, and the Shadow Temple is a remnant of some of the hidden cruelty that took place at the time. It was built by the Sheikah, a tribe who has long served the royal family of Hyrule both in peacetime as well as during the war. It's revealed that they served as a sort of secret police force who operated from the shadows, serving as royal bodyguards, assassinating enemies of the king, as well as taking care of prisoners of war, locking them up and even resorting to torture to get information, until eventually disposing of them in ways that are perhaps better left imagined. Of course, this wasn't exactly something the royal family wanted the world to see and was preferably kept from the history books. And so, below the depths of Kakariko Village, home of the Sheikah at the time of the war, the Shadow Temple was used to obscure these acts of cruelty and keep them out of sight from the public eye. This place represents one of the darkest depths Nintendo has ever dared to go with their storytelling, even if it is hidden under the surface, both literally and figuratively. Interestingly enough, although the Shadow Temple is one of the more popular dungeons to theorize about, in many respects it has the most fleshed out backstory out of all 5 temples present in Ocarina of Time. We know exactly what this place is and the purpose it once served: a secret wartime prison and torture site for enemies of Hyrule. That isn't to say that there are no mysteries left to unravel about the Shadow Temple though. There's the mysterious floating ship that carries its passengers across a foggy chasm, for example, very reminiscent of the undead ferryman who carries souls across the river Styx. We still don't know for sure why it's here or what it was used for, though there are plenty of theories about it, of course. Another interesting feature are the many statues of what seem to be blind rats or mice, perhaps a reference to the act of turning a blind eye to the atrocities committed on behalf of the royal family. It's a central theme all throughout the Shadow Temple, the aspect of the unseen, hidden truths and events taking place in the shadows. This is exemplified by the Lens of Truth, also known as the Eye of Truth, a magic artifact capable of peering through and revealing the unseen. Even the insignia of the Sheikah itself is representative of this, as well as the symbol on the door of the Shadow Temple of an eye in 3 stages: open, half open, and closed.
And of course, we can't talk about the Shadow Temple without also mentioning Bongo Bongo. You know, just another piece of nightmare fuel straight from the minds of the Zelda team. We're not gonna dive into the possible identity of Bongo Bongo, as there are so many theories about it would take ages to get through all of them. Besides, I happen to have already made a video that focuses specifically on the bosses of Ocarina of Time. But a general consensus is that he could have been one of the prisoners who was maimed and killed in the Shadow Temple by the Sheikah, or perhaps the concoction of many of them, turning them or him into a monstrous, evil spirit being hell-bent on causing destruction, mainly due to his appearance, which is that of a torso with a missing head and amputated hands. With all that said, it's possible that the Shadow Temple once served a different purpose before it was repurposed into a torture prison from hell. Perhaps, just like some of the other temples, it was once a place of worship, or maybe something akin to a mausoleum, a place where the dead were laid to rest, which would explain the floating ship, as it could have been used for a sort of soul-faring ritual. It's not even clear if Ganondorf's influence had anything to do with the current state of the Shadow Temple. Though his corruption has spread on a countrywide scale, it's arguable if the Shadow Temple had any need of an outside force to corrupt it. The history of this place alone seems to have been perfectly capable of causing a corruption of its own, and some areas in and around Kakariko were already infested by the undead long before Ganondorf's power grab. With the Shadow Temple, Nintendo truly walked the line between a relatively innocent and classic fantasy story and straight-up horror, and it's unlikely that we'll ever see something even close to it. In the meantime, though, it'll remain a hidden part of Hyrule's bloody history, and theories about it will no doubt continue to be discussed for many years to come.
And that, my friends, concludes this part of the lore behind the dungeons in Ocarina of Time. Be sure to let us know your thoughts and theories on some of these locations down in the comments, and of course, go and check out the other half on my friend Bandit's channel, which covers the Dongo's Cavern, the forest, water, and Spirit Temple. Anyway, thank you for the collaboration, good sir.
Anytime, Mr. Maze, you know me, I hear the words Ocarina of Time and I jump in head first, no matter whose channel or video it is. So, yeah, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun and I'm so grateful for your audience for putting up with me as well. If you guys watching are interested in the other dungeons, like Mr. Maze said, they are live right now over on my channel. So hey, maybe see you there. Bandit away!
And with that, I bid you all farewell, and I hope you have a great week. A special thanks to BanditGames, to my mods, and of course my Patreons and channel members. I hope to see you all in the next video. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.